1996. A quiet town called Woodsboro. A landline phone rings, and a simple question changes the horror game forever.
What's your favorite scary movie?
Wes Craven's Scream didn't just shake up the slasher genre, it changed the culture. It dragged the audience into a whodunit game, turning every viewer into a wannabe detective trying to figure out who Ghostface was. And that legacy has maintained and has led to something that is quite rare. A franchise with multiple installments where every single one of them is pretty quality. But with that said, all good things must come to an end, and the franchise did kind of take a stab in the dark with Scream 7. After the Core 4 era crashed to a halt due to an off-screen drama, Scream 7 landed with a thud that split the fandom right down the middle. The big swing this time around was the use of AI to recreate legacy characters for those cameo scenes, something that had some viewers intrigued, but left a lot of fans feeling, well, underwhelmed. For a franchise that's built its reputation on being sharp, self-aware and ahead of the curve, leaning into digital resurrections of beloved character felt a little too on the nose for some, and not in a clever meta way that Scream usually pulls off. And when the dust settled, the movie didn't exactly give us a clear direction either. The Core 4 storyline was essentially wrapped up, the legacy characters had been brought back in a way that left us like, now what? And the future of the series suddenly felt a lot less certain than it once did. This all leaves us in a weird spot. The Ghostface mask is still one of horror's most recognisable icons, the brand is still massively valuable, and the studio clearly isn't ready to let it die. But after everything that happened behind the scenes and the way that Scream 7 landed with fans, the big question hanging over the franchise now is simple. Does Scream still have another era left in it, or has the game finally reached its final act? Well, lock your doors, ignore your phones, and start side-eyeing your friend group, because we are breaking down everything Scream 8. The official teasers, the cast, the timeline mess, and of course, our most unhinged bloody theories on where Ghostface will appear next. This is First Slash Scream 8. To understand where Scream 8 is heading, we need to first look back into the past. Scream is basically the blueprint for every meta slasher trope we know and love. Self-aware killers, horror movie rulebooks, final girls who know exactly what movie they're in. This franchise basically invented the idea that the audience is a part of the game. I mean, I guess Mystery Inc. did it first, just a lot less bloody. Scream 7 pulled in a record-breaking $64.1 million domestic opening weekend, the biggest debut in the franchise's history. That sounds great, right? So why does there seem to be such a stinky sentiment around the movie? Fans and critics have been pretty harsh on the film for its over-reliance on nostalgia, loss of its meta identity, and ultimately just feeling kind of bland, not offering anything new or interesting to justify its existence. Then you have the use of AI, and it basically being the weapon for the killers this time around. I mean, AI is a very, very touchy subject at the moment, so if you're gonna do it, you need to hit it out of the park, and well, this was just kind of cynical and lazy. It felt like some corporate bigwig was like, we need the legacy characters in this one, but how do we bring them back? Well, AI is popular right now, let's do that. Ultimately though, it seems to be the ending that has left the fans most sour, some calling it the worst in the franchise's history, nonsense and illogical. Which is a problem when you've built a franchise around allowing the audience to play detective alongside the characters in the movie. And suddenly the conversation around the movie wasn't about the mystery or the kills, it was about whether the franchise has finally crossed the line into corporate gimmick territory, which leaves the future of Scream in a pretty strange place. Like we said, the Ghostface mask is still one of the most recognisable icons in horror. The brand still prints money and the studio clearly has no intention of letting it die. So now, in fans' minds, Scream 8 needs to be framed as something of a course correction. In other words, the franchise might be about to reinvent itself again. Which makes us wonder, who's picking up the knife next? The crew behind the scenes clearly aren't done with Ghostface yet. And despite what we said, neither are we. We're a sucker for the formula, what can we say? But as much as we do actually want it, Scream 8 still hasn't actually been given a green light yet. Franchise creator Kevin Williamson, who directed and co-wrote Scream 7, has already hinted that another film is very much on the table. Speaking to Variety, he said that the team has a lot of ideas for where the story could go next, and if the audience shows up, the studio will almost certainly want to keep the series going. But in a recent interview with Hello Sidney, the filmmaker said that he did not expect to write or direct Scream 8. I mean, come on, they've gotta make this thing right. I mean, if the opening weekend is anything to go by, it's looking pretty likely. Of course, the movie will need to finish its run in a strong position, but at the time of recording, it's looking pretty positive for the studio. And if Scream 8 does move forward, Paramount Skydance might be even eyeing a 2027 release. That would line things up nicely with the 30th anniversary of Scream 2, similar to how Scream 7 arrived 30 years after the original Scream. And hey, I know some of you are probably like, but Scream 7 has literally just come out. But look, a quick turnaround isn't exactly anything new for the Scream franchise. Scream 2 came out in December 1997, barely a year after the original slashed its way into cinemas in December 1996. And more recently, Scream 6 arrived in March 2023, just 14 months after the 2022 reboot. Now yes, obviously there's been a couple of slower gaps. Scream 3 and Scream 7 both landed about 3 years after the films before them, mostly because of behind the scenes shakeups that forced some pretty big behind the scenes story changes. But the real odd one out is Scream 4. That movie showed up 11 years after Scream 3, and then another 11 years passed before the franchise came back again with the 2022 revival. But realistically, if it's bringing in the cash, it's pretty unlikely the studio lets Ghostface sit on the shelf for another decade. I think this franchise would need to bomb on a nuclear level at the box office for them to be like, right, put Ghostface in the cooler, we'll reboot this in another 10 years. The executive producer suggested the next installment can move pretty quickly if it does get the green light, with filming potentially starting as early as this year. And when it comes to the cast, well, this is where things become a little bit more uncertain. Courtney Cox, who has played Gale Weathers since the original 1996 film, says that she thinks everybody would love to come back for another Scream, but also admitted she's not sure she'd actually be a part of the next one, at least right now. And I mean, I'm sorry, but what would a Scream movie be without Gale Weathers eating every fit and getting stabbed in the shoulder every chance she gets? It would be trash, that's what it would be. Scream 7 brought back Neve Campbell as Sidney Prescott after she skipped Scream 6 in 2023, but unfortunately the comeback hasn't exactly gone down the way the filmmakers probably hoped. Critically, the film ended up becoming the worst reviewed entry in the entire franchise, which leaves the series in a pretty strange place. Honestly, Scream 7 might have accidentally backed the franchise into a bit of a corner right here, because by bringing back the entire roster of legacy killers through those AI phone screen cameos, they've kind of exhausted the nostalgia card. The franchise has always loved pulling surprises from its past, but after that reveal, there aren't really many big legacy tricks to play. But to be honest, if they went with the original idea, it could have been even more chaotic. Kevin Williamson actually revealed that they shot an alternate ending that hinted the real Stu Macher might still be alive. Yeah, crushed by a TV. Definitely dead Stu. Apparently the idea was floated as a possible twist, but the test audiences much preferred the version where Stu stays very much dead. And honestly, thank God. That would have been a massive jump in the shark moment for the franchise. You'd never have any investment in these movies ever again, because ultimately you'd just be waiting for them to be resurrected later down the line. But now that the franchise has gone down the AI resurrection route, it does raise a big question for Scream 8. Where do you go from here with legacy reveals when you've basically played all your cards? Well, there are two. I'd still love to see the Carpenter sisters return. Sam and Tara were a huge part of the revival era, and it still feels weird that their story kind of just stopped. Realistically though, this might be easier said than done. Melissa Barrera was shamefully fired from Scream 7 back in November 2023 after those social media posts about the Israel and that whole situation created a pretty messy split between the studio and the cast, so bringing Sam back into story might not be on the table right now, which leaves Scream 8 with a pretty big challenge. Because if legacy characters have already been played and the new generation has been pushed aside, the franchise now has to figure out what the next era of Scream actually looks like. And of course, you know the score by now. Here at Oddly Horrific, we've got some pretty epic, slightly unhinged, but blood-soaked theories about where Ghostface might be heading next. Let's get into it. Okay, let's start with the one that would absolutely destroy the internet and probably a lot of fans' well-being. The Gale Weathers opening kill. Look. Courtney Cox has already expressed some hesitation about returning to the role, mentioning the physical and emotional exhaustion that comes with playing Gale after nearly 30 years. So naturally, a lot of fans are speculating that Scream 8 could use Gale as the opening kill. And honestly, from a storyteller's perspective, it would be brutal. Killing off Gale in the opening scene would immediately raise the stakes, and would no doubt pull Sidney back into the chaos. But alternatively, what if they didn't kill Gale off? Hear me out on this one. What if Gale becomes Ghostface? I know, it sounds crazy, but before you throw your phone across the room, there are actually a few interesting pieces here. Gale was clearly hurt by Sidney disappearing and not helping during the New York attacks. She even brings it up in that interview scene. She's still mourning Dewey, and it feels like there's definitely a lingering resentment towards Sidney that's been bubbling under the surface for a while now. Combine grief, resentment, and 30 years of trauma, and suddenly the movie starts to look a little bit more interesting. And I'm not saying this is where the franchise should go. In fact, I'm not sure if I even want it to go there. But hey, look, I did promise some unhinged theories and speculation. And I don't know, I just feel like Gale gave me a slightly weird vibe in Scream 7. Plus, Sidney ending the movie with "I trust you too" felt almost a little sus, like it could be setting up something for the next movie. Now, speaking of chaos, let's talk about another theory that's been floating around for years. The Ghostface Cult. Instead of just one killers, or two, there's an idea out there that Ghostface has become something bigger, a symbol, and a persona that's inspired an entire network of true crime obsessives. Multiple killers, multiple locations, all inspired by the Woodsboro murders. And if the franchise really wants to lean into something current, the idea actually fits perfectly with the explosion of true crime culture online. Right now, social media is absolutely flooded with accounts dedicated to breaking down real-life murders. Entire TikTok pages, YouTube channels, Reddit threads, podcasts, all analysing gruesome cases in forensic detail, turning killers into internet lore and crime scenes into viral content. And that's exactly the kind of cultural moment Scream has always loved to satirize. I can imagine a group of killers that grew up in that environment. People who spent years obsessing over the Woodsboro murders, watching documentaries, dissecting the Ghostface attacks online, arguing about killer motives in the comment sections. I mean, all it would take for someone to become Ghostface these days would be a couple of minutes on X. It's the kind of dark, media-obsessed commentary that the Scream franchise has always thrived on. And if Ghostface has really become that big of a cultural legend online, who says it stays in Woodsboro? Which brings us to the theory fans have been floating around. Ghostface, far from home. Yes, I'm talking Scream 8, Ghostface goes to Europe kind of vibe. Imagine this, Sidney's daughter is studying abroad or travelling through Europe on a gap year when a new Ghostface attack suddenly happens overseas. Sidney hears about it and prepares to fly out to help, but at the same time another Ghostface appears back home trying to stalk her. Two killers, two locations, one global Ghostface problem. It sounds ridiculous, but honestly the franchise has always pushed the boundaries of its setting, with Scream 6 moving to New York. A new location would instantly refresh the formula, and after 7 films set mostly around Woodsboro and the US, a new international setting would give the franchise a completely different visual and cultural backdrop. European cities, unfamiliar environments, language barriers, crowded public places, historic streets, all of that would make Ghostface feel unpredictable once again. Or alternatively, you could do Ghostface goes skiing in a snowy setting, and I would love to see that too. And if you really wanted to expand the world of Scream, there's actually another idea hidden inside the movies already. You remember Kirby's line in Scream 6 about investigating Ghostface crimes? That one line suggests that maybe the Woodsboro murders might not be the only Ghostface attacks out there. So theoretically, you could have a completely new cast of characters being hunted by a copycat killer using the Ghostface persona. You could even build the story around something like a support group of Ghostface survivors, with the killer targeting people who previously escaped these attacks. It would still exist in the same universe, but it wouldn't rely on dragging Sidney Prescott back into danger for the 8th time. A fresh start, without needing a full reboot. And honestly, that might be the smartest move the franchise could make right now, because if Scream wants to survive another decade, it might need to start building a new legacy, instead of constantly resurrecting the old one. So, Scream 8 feels like it could go in a lot of different directions. The franchise could double down on the legacy angle, keep pulling characters from the past back into the spotlight, and continue building on the mythology of Woodsboro. Or it could start pushing Ghostface somewhere completely new. A new generation of characters, a wider world of Ghostface crimes, maybe even something bigger than the Woodsboro story altogether. Because after 7 movies, the big question hanging over the franchise right now is pretty simple. Has Scream reached the point where it needs to reinvent itself again? Or is the fanbase still here for one more round of the same game? Because if there's anything we've learned from this series is that Ghostface never stays buried for long. Well, unless you're Stu, of course. But what do you think? What direction would you like to see Scream 8 take? Should the franchise keep leaning into legacy characters? Or is it time for Ghostface to haunt an entirely new story? Let us know your pitches, your wildest theories in the comments down below. If you're vibing with our first Slash series, tell us which horror franchise we should take a stab at next. Thanks for watching everybody, and we'll see you in the next one.